do want to give you a warning that if you get interested and involved in doing this, you are likely to become an addict, because it's exciting going looking for bats in trees, despite the rigors of, as you see, some cold and wintry days out there, and some people even climbing up trees. Very quick summary overview. If you only remember one slide from tonight, try and remember this one. Bat roosts in trees. Studying those, it's a fascinating and accessible and addictive way to gain a new insight on where bats roost and how they live. But it shows that we don't know enough, and it's easy to underestimate what bats will actually use. It also underlines that proof of use by roosting bats is uncommon, and it's very definitely a complementary approach to other methods of looking for bats and understanding their populations. And in broad, almost any tree, almost any feature, almost any time of year will be suited to almost any species of bat for roosting in a tree. So I have this long-term involvement with Bexlines monitoring down in Wiltshire, Green Lane Wood. It's one of the 2 sites I've been working at. And when I got involved with that at the end of 2015, this is the pictures to what was known about where the Bechsteins roosted. The round circles are boxes, and the blue square is the one tree roost that was known. And that was just what was known, where it was at. The same year, I happened to go on the Bat Tree Habitat Key training course run by Henry Andrews and Louis Pearson, and got a better understanding of how to go about looking, and particularly how to go about recording and making sense of the sort of things that we found, and also got the first chance to use these very effective endoscopes, the rigid ones, which are expensive but very good at what they do. And one particular thing, they allow you to record what you see, videos and so on. And Henry's enthusiasm and mania, shall I call it, for recording details also rubs off. So you come away with experience of how to go looking and the enthusiasm to go doing so. So this was one of the first that I found at Green Lane, at the Bechsteins. Enjoying use of my newly bought rigid endoscope. And you can see it's quite close to the ground and in quite a small, narrow tree. And suddenly, during a radio tracking session, having found this one and started looking at other trees in the area, we started finding a whole lot more of them, and it became very fascinating and addictive. So this is where we got to the end of well, it says 2016. That's not true, actually. I've got the wrong date there, but 2019 that should be, I think. This is the tree roosts of the Bechsteins found over the period, that sort of 5-year period, including the one that was a radio tracked batch from 2013, and all these others that have subsequently found. So that we've gone to a very different picture of knowing about where the Bechsteins roost. There's another one that's hidden from me at the top here. I hope you can see it, another little yellow cross up there. There, I can just see the edge of it. Yeah. Two little tree roosts up there. But one of the things that this has taught us, along with radio tracking, is that every time we start thinking we know where the maternity roosts are, this one, for instance, we'll come back to later on, was a major maternity roost, they go and move and start using a different area. So one year, this was the main roosting area for the maternity colony. The next year it was up here, and the next year it was in this part of the wood. So this is just separating it in green, the radio tracking, the roosts found via radio tracking, as opposed to the roosts found via endoscoping. So that's all of them for Bechsteins, and then those are the ones found by different means. So about half of them we've found by simply going speculatively endoscoping likely looking features. And then all the little blue spots are all the other species roosts that we found while doing that. So we've now got a really quite dense picture in just 5 years, going from one tree roost known in Green Lane Wood to, now I can't remember the figure, 70 odd, I think it is. So that was very engaging, and led to a lot of a desire to kind of share some of this experience and observations. This is another one of the early videos from that study. And you'll quite often hear people saying that if you find cobwebs somewhere, that means that the bats don't use it, or there aren't any bats there. I didn't have the sound turned off. You get the creaking of the endoscope. So you can just see some cobweb in front of the screen there. We're going through one. I think we maybe, yep, here's a second set of cobweb. And then there was 3 layers in front of that long-eared bat. So if someone tells you cobwebs mean that there's not a bat in there, or that bats don't go there, you can remember this film. So the Bat Tree Habitat Key is one great resource for going and having a look at what sorts of trees have been recorded with bats roosting in them. But of course, there are 2 limitations to what data is in there. One is that most of the people who subscribe data to it are like me. They don't climb trees. So you're only really looking in the bottom 2 or maybe 3 meters of the trees. And the other is that most people who find bats in trees never get around to submitting data to the BTHK. So be aware that it's a very partial data source. However, an overview, oak and ash are favorite trees for roosting bats. They produce nice dry cavities that can often be quite long lasting. Field maple seems to also be excellent, although it's often a smaller tree and doesn't necessarily produce some of the larger cavities, and clearly being so small is seldom used by woodpeckers, whereas oak and ash are often used by woodpeckers, and woodpecker cavities are very good for large maternity groups. Hazard beams, which is not something I found many of myself, but these also are more likely to occur in things like oak and ash, or at least occur and be useful than in field maples. Sycamores offer many cavities, but most are damp and wet. And most other species of tree will produce some degree of cavities. And to many people's surprise, indeed mine as well, conifers can also offer excellent roosts, and indeed even bushes like elder. We'll see some examples in a couple of minutes. So what types of trees might you look out for? Where would you go and look? Where would be the right place to find a tree that might be used by a bat? So in woods, yep, and also out of woods. Basically wherever there's a suitable cavity and suitable foraging. As previously advertised, we'll see an ash tree that was half a kilometre outside of a wood and was a major maternity roost. So out of woods is just as likely. Size of tree, well, the narrowest tree on the BTHK database is 6.2 centimeters diameter at breast height. So diameter at breast height is approximately 1.3 meters off the ground, and 6.2 centimeters diameter. If you want a quick check on roughly what size that is. I'm told that if you put your fingertips on the outsides of your eyes, just close your eyes, put your fingertips on the outsides, and then pull your hand away. What you're now looking at is 10 centimeters. So just over half of that distance is the narrowest so far recorded diameter of breast height for a roost tree. And 43% of the roosts in the BTHK are below 30 centimeters in diameter. Although again, I mentioned that it's a little bit biased. What about height? Lowest entrance recorded so far is 10 centimeters above the ground, with the bats at 45 centimeters. So it seems like there's no such thing as too low, maybe. Most maternity roosts, however, tend to be recorded as higher up, 2 meters or more. There are many single or minor roosts at below 3 meters. So what are we looking for in terms of a feature that could be used by a bat in a tree? Henry has dubbed these things PRFs, potential roost features. And well, we like that it annoys him very much when we talk about going PRFing, and he doesn't believe that's a verb. Yeah, PRFs, potential roost features, any space where one or more bats can roost, and roost is just rest. PRFs are wounds and damage and defects in trees, result of the tree sustaining some sort of damage and then trying to heal itself sufficiently to contain that damage and to become stabilized again. Humans, if we get a cut, we will, our skin and tissues will seal that over and completely close the hole. But trees are not, do not always do that. They'll, if it's a small enough wound, they will certainly close it over. But their main aim is to become stable. And you've probably all seen a tree somewhere that's got a big wound down one side and a rot hole, and maybe the heartwood rotted out, and it's just a hulk, and you could even step inside it. And the tree's perfectly happy about that. It's not that bothered. So yeah, there some kind of damage or wound. And the occupancy in those features is a factor of the motive, the intention of the roosting activity, and the opportunity to do it. And that's affected all by competition, because they're not, of course, the only animals that might be wanting to spend time inside a hole in a tree. So these are all factors that come into play as to whether you're going to find occupancy or not, and whether a particular feature might be high value or not. So capacity and suitability for the bats, and not all roost features are equal to a bat. It's not enough to say, well, here's a hole, we're going to fell that, load off that tree, and that's got a hole in it, but this one's got a hole, so that'll be fine. It's the same. They're not. And as an illustration of that, here's if I can get my thing to advance. Why are you not advancing? Okay. Yeah, Keith's chair analogy, which is all about occupancy and significance. A roost, any place or structure that a bat uses for shelter or protection. And so I was trying to explain the way that bats use tree roosts to someone, and decided to use the chairs, the idea of chairs in a house. We all tend to have more chairs than we're individually sitting in at any one time. There are 2 of us in a household, so we need 2 chairs, you might think. So down at the bottom, occupancy at any one time, 2 of us. However, our chair collection turns out to be around about 30 chairs. Depends how you define it, but this is what I'm doing. I'm including things like these mobile chairs in the chimney there, which you use for a specialized purpose. Daily, there are maybe only 3 chairs that might be used. Summer, maybe only 6. Winter, none that are winter only. Social, there are some chairs that might be only used for social, like dining chairs in our case, maybe. and temporary for specific features. So let's go through a few of those. Some are used very frequently and for essential reasons. I'm sitting in it now at my desk every day, more or less, and then others are used for recovery. Some roosts, chairs, are only suitable in restricted seasons, while some may only be used while actually eating, and some only for an occasional brief rest. Some that may otherwise be only used temporarily may be used for extended periods in the right circumstances. And some favorite chairs just simply may not be accessible to you due to competition, even if the competitor is not optimally suited to, and this applies to bats as well. Sometimes they'll cram themselves into a space that you just don't think they should be in. Sometimes you get cohabitation of bats and other species in a roost. And I've forgotten why I put that one in. Sometimes there may be intense competition with multiple species, and your favorite roost may no longer be available. Some roosts may only really be used at times of gregarious sociability for bats that may be during swarming season, perhaps, or perhaps it's due to maternity. And further, the distribution of available roosts can be very patchy and localized, and the form may be somewhat suboptimal. So in short, not all chairs, not all roosts are equal, and any individual bat or any individual human will have far more resource that they know and that they use and that they require to fulfill their annual behaviors than you'll find them in on any one day. So here's the occupation for there's 1,800 checks that across 3 sites that myself and Danny Linton and Jim Mulholland have been doing. And you'll see that the majority overall of those checks of roosts resulted in no bats, and 1 bat or 2 bats, and so on, becomes just fewer as you go. So that on the whole, when you're looking in a tree for a bat, you're really not expecting to find one. When you do, it's gold dust, and this is what becomes part of the addictive excitement. It's gambling, it's against the odds, but it's a better odds than the lottery. Not necessarily as financially rewarding. Looking at it a different way, this is the percentage of the inspections that were found at occupancy over 12 months. So for features that were found to have a single, occupancy on 1 occasion across 3 different sites, the frequency for that is down, well, they're all, look at these, they're all below 5%. So 1 in 20 visits as a broad figure. Maybe you want to select when you're going to go looking to try and improve your chances. How's that going to work out for you? Is this something you can do? So here's one of the sites. The dotted line is the overall occupancy of by bats, and the coloured lines are the individual different species. All these are to the same. Nope, these 2 are to the same scale. But there's not a strong pattern there. There's a slight increase in occupancy in December and in April. But in all months, it's fairly low occupancy at that site. Okay, how about this site? Well, so we've got a distinct peak in occupancy, not April, but March. And another one in August. That was a maternity group. And a bit of a peak in October. Otherwise, it's not very high. How about this one? A little bit of a peak in April and a big peak in August. That was a maternity group. So unless you're going to get lucky with finding a maternity group, much of the year looks the same. I think I ought to do these charts excluding maternity just as a comparison, but not done yet. So where would we go looking? Received wisdom, if I can call it that, directs you to go and look at bigger trees. That's certainly what I was taught when I was getting into this. Go and look for the ancient trees, the veteran trees. Now, I've not looked at many ancient and veteran trees. The few I've looked at, I've not found any bats in yet. I found some large trees with bats in them, but not veterans and ancients. This is a maternity roost of Bechsteins. This is one that's 1/2 kilometre outside of the woodland. So it's in a hedgerow and farmland. I've lost my cursor. There's the cursor. Okay, so yeah, here's this hedgerow and farmland. And it's a pretty scruffy ash tree with a whole bunch of woodpecker holes, more than 6 entrances, more than 3 separate cavities. And it is 1/2 kilometre outside of woodland, which was quite a surprise for what is always thought of as a woodland bat. And the counts as well were quite surprising. This is including juveniles, so they're on the wing, but 108 and 101 and 99 Bechsteins in early August, when the average supposed colony size is 30 females. So you would not be expecting anywhere near 60, including juveniles on the wing. Another large tree. This one has a big wound, and the tree has flexed at some point. So there's some broken heartwood, a flake that sticks out, and there's a wedge up behind it. And then at the top of it, there's a rot hole going up and in. So behind the flake, there was a Soprano Pipstrail maternity colony, which I discovered by walking through the wood looking for fungi and seeing a huge black splodge of bat droppings and looking up. I didn't get a count, unfortunately. But the next time that I was able to go visit in 2019, 15 years later, in the summer, there was a Donald Benton's maternity roost in the rot hole at the top. And we'll just have a quick video. That was a pip that came to see the hole. So this is done with a thermal camera. Just on a tripod and recording, and then editing down the highlights. As much as anything, I was curious to see if they all followed the same flight direction as they came out, but it's a bit mixed. But you can see they're all pretty quick as they come out and scoot off. The dark lines you'll see up and down the trunk actually these are slugs grazing around on top of the beach, on the beach bark. And we're nearly at the end now, but you can see that the cavity itself is still very warm from all the bats' body warmth during the day. And that bat's decided not to come out. Or maybe it did. Okay, so apologies to Bill Watson for borrowing this, but just a quick selection of the sorts of unexpected roost features that I've come across. So there's a Scots pine. This one's in white cross green, so quite close to us all. And it's a curious low-level wound. I assume this is probably a felling wound where a tree in the past has fallen to the saw and has scuffed all the way down here, bearing the timber, and so it's rotted away and in and up. And this had 7 natterers in it, which in early April is going to be a maternity group. Interesting for the fact that there are a few of these sorts of wounds around. 3 of them had bat roosts in. The other 2 had Daubentons and brown long-eareds. And that was just on one visit. This is a site where the woodland has been through planted with Scots pine many years ago, and the intention now that it's a reserve is to remove all the Scots pine, which could pose a challenge for some of these bats. But it's worth looking around any sites you know which have conifers, because they could have these features. There's a bunch of other conifer species that have also been recorded with roosts in them: Corsican pine, yew, larch, redwood, Monterey cypress, Norway spruce, western red cedar. Some of these had maternity groups, like Lisla's maternity. And yeah, so just to not have too close to mind. This is the one that we had that video of early on with the Bechsteins. It's really quite a small tree. It's only 7.9 centimeters diameter at breast height, the field maple. And that is just 60 centimeters, I think, from the ground to the roost entrance. And it's been occupied now by 3 different species. And over 30 checks had 6 occupancies, so quite a high occupancy rate. Bechsteins, natterers, and long-eared. So it doesn't have to be an impressive looking tree to be well used by bats. And the Bechsteins had a ring on the left, which means it was one of the breeding females from the group. This is another thin one. This is 6.4 centimeter diameter. It was actually a dead stem as well. And it was also temporarily the smallest on the BTHK database. But it's not the smallest now. That was taken by this one, which is a sycamore, a really scruffy sycamore. And you're probably all familiar with this sycamore, fast-growing, weedy tree, prone to lots of bark damage one way or another, and forms these ready cavities. And they're well worth investigating. Yeah, oh, and in this case, the bat was just inside of the entrance. And that's fairly classic for a long-eared in the sort of shoulder months or winter. Another thin tree, this is a regrowth elm, has a very similar sort of a wound, but a very tall spire, and the natterer's bat was well up in there. And we're close to the edge. This is the edge of the wood here, and there's the thin tree just in the middle of that photograph. This was April, and a similar tree has been used at similar sort of a shoulder time to the year. I think I'm going to have to rush a bit. This is an elder found by radio tracking a Bechstein's bat by Paul and Colleen Hope on the Isle of Wight. And this elder was in a small copse way out up on the uplands, far away from woodland. And it was only 8 centimeters diameter down at the breast height down here, and even narrower up where the bat has gone in this broken tube. So even elder, that you wouldn't even think of it as a tree. Zombie trees, dead trees, can also be used by bats. So here's a bunch of natterer's bats in this, which is a dead elm, and it has a big wound going up it, and it has various small holes going into that as well. Be used on multiple occasions, and it's one of the many that we've now got as part of the study in White and Woods. This is the low one, so bats are just about that level at the back of this cavity that goes in, and To get in and out of there, they really must have to fly pretty much onto the ground, found by Jim Mulholland at Green Lane, but only occupied on 2 out of 24 monthly checks. And so far only with the one species, brown long-eared, a single and then two. 2 years exactly apart. Larger tree, but a less common feature. So where two trunks lean against each other and rub against each other, they will produce callus reaction timber, which cushions them against damage from each other. So that cushioning builds up and effectively pushes the two trunks apart, and inside between that cushioning is often a cavity. Very often there's no way into that cavity, for a bat at least, but if there is a hole, and in this case there's one there, then bats may go in and out. And this was used, we had a trail camera on this that recorded over about 3 weeks, and up to 12 long-eared bats using it, and a single Pipstrail visited on one night. Elsewhere, I've heard of a record of a nocturnal maternity roost in one of these that was, I think the count was 90 noctules, but yeah, less common. Tubes. So far, mostly we seem to find long-eared bats using tubes. This is the bottom of the bat, at the top of the tube, and the front of the bat, then the bottom. And the tube itself is only 23 centimeters, 29 centimeters tall, so not very tall. But this seems to be a fairly regular thing that long-eareds at least will do. I think we've had Bentons as well using a tube, but less often. If you follow the guidelines, this is from the BCT's Good Practice Guidelines, then you would be primarily looking for valuing open cavities which extend above the entrance. But you may well know that woodpecker holes tend to go in and down, and they're often very well used for maternity groups. So here's just the one example, but there are very many of these around. So absolutely do not discount any features that go in and down. They can be used not only by maternity groups. There's a nice picture somewhere, I haven't refound it, but of a long-eared bat behind a piece of bark, and it's just a little bit down from the entrance into the bark. Here's an even more uncommon thing. This is a big beech tree, I think it is, and with a really big hole, big enough that you can crawl into if you're so minded, and about 2 meters up, your head would be just touching these two lesser horseshoe bats. On the whole, people are going to say lesser horseshoe bats will not roost in trees because tree cavities would require them to crawl in at some stage, and here they're able to fly right in. So that's just a bit of a whirlwind of a selection of hopefully eye-opening and inspiring examples. Inspiration and support's critical, and Danny certainly gives me a lot of inspiration and support, and also a lot of practice with going around Whiteham looking at recording. The BTHK was a great springboard and continues to have a lot of information, and the website has a lot of resources, plus you can always download the latest database of what roosts have been reported to them, so you can get a good look at what sort of things are available. Again, I'll caution that it is definitely biased in what's available in the way of data in there, but it's certainly well worth having a look at. And it is an open data sharing project, so please, if you do record any roosts, do your best to at least gather the basic data and submit your information to there. That's the sort of information that has allowed this book to be produced, which is a kind of a first attempt at gathering and interpretation and providing guidance on surveying for and making reasonable assessments for bats in trees. Yep, you can on the website submit single records very easily. There's a simple Google form, but you can also send multiple records in Excel. They also have a great Facebook page if you do Facebook, where you can see an awful lot of videos and photos where remarkable findings are shared. And that's me. That's all I have for you tonight. Any questions?
Hi. Hi, Keith. It's Bob here.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, there have been some questions coming in the chat. Thank you very much for that excellent overview. I personally particularly loved your analogy of human use of chairs with the the bats' use of roosts. That really is a memorable image for getting a grip on the flexibility of mind that's required. I love that. But anyway.
I should have acknowledged as well that having used it once in a talk and to explain to some people, Jim then picked it up really well, and for the last few years has been doing a really nice job of presenting it at various different talks and conferences, and it goes the rounds, and he does a really nice version of it.
Well, also, of course, you've got excellent set of pictures illustrating the different ones. I love the ones with the dogs and so on. Great. Anyway, questions that other people have come up with. First, in no particular order, but more or less in the order that they happen to be asked, I suppose. The traditional view of it being old trees, but you were talking very much. What you said seems to negate that it can be trees of any age, basically. Would you just like to confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the really significant factors that has come out of the increase in recording that the BTHK project has generated. I suppose there's two things that the recent decades of increasing amounts of ecologists going out doing surveys, doing professional surveys, has definitely increased the number of people who are finding and recording bat roosts in trees. The downside of that as a vehicle for improving how we understand it is that on the whole, those ecologists are busy people and they don't get around to submitting the data to a central point. You know, there's no fault there in a sense. We're all busy people, and it's not, you know. But the great thing about the BTHK is that it's provided a standardized format, or at least a framework for that. Because I mean, Henry would ideally have you record a great many variables for each cavity, and really, if you were doing it as a scientific project, you would record all of those every time you inspected it in case there were any changes. Life isn't long enough for most of us to do that. So the combination of the two, though, I think gives us an enormous amount of data, and the more ecologists who can submit data, the better. But we're still very much early days in this. You know, the BTHK has only been going as a kind of a project for about 6 or 7 years. Ecologist surveys a little bit longer. These endoscopes haven't been available as this kind of quality for a great deal longer, and you know, they're not exactly affordable for everybody. That's £500 or £600 for a rigid, and you can get a lot of endoscope for a lot less money, but the quality of what you'll be able to do with it is less. There are very many you can buy on Amazon for, you know, £25, £30 an endoscope that plugs into your phone. But there are two downsides of that. If it's plugged into your phone, then now you're holding your phone and the endoscope is usually quite a soft, wiggly thing with only a small amount of stiffening. That means that if the feature goes far in, or if it's far above your head, you have no real hope of being able to control where the thing goes. So you can only do a pretty crude inspection. A lot of the trees that get surveyed for development, and really, I suppose the majority of trees in our woodlands, and therefore the majority of trees that get observed, are young. I suppose it's a population thing, isn't it? The veteran trees and the big and the old trees, they're the relative scarcity. So to gather a lot of data on how important those are, you'd have to probably put a disproportionate effort disproportionate to their availability in the landscape into inspecting them. And as yet, that's not been my approach.
Another interesting point that somebody raised, though, this was Sally Gillard, about the improving equipment, not just the endoscope, but also the thermal detectors and so on and so forth, and also the sonic detectors. There's been a great improvement of the standard of equipment that's available to bat investigators over the recent past. And she was wondering whether this might on its own account for the apparent discrepancy between the success of bats and birds, in that birds are pretty much detected by the old-fashioned ways, the traditional ways.
Tried and tested.
Yeah, and whereas bats, maybe you're just finding more because of the more sophisticated equipment.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it is actually addressed specifically in the NBMP report that they do recognize that there are differences over time with not just the equipment availability and the quality of that equipment, but also the ability to identify bats and the number of people going out looking.
Yeah.
Much easier to detect lots of bats when you've got lots of people looking for them and reporting than when there were fewer people. But they do take that into account in whatever analysis and modeling they do, which is over my head. So
okay. And another question about trends at the moment from Kristin Thompson. How do you perceive the effect of ash dieback on all of this? Is it going to create new opportunities in trees, or is it going to lead to the removal of a lot of trees and thus a removal of a lot of opportunities?
I think the short answer there again is we don't really know. It's very hard to imagine quite what the impact will be. There are some things you can hypothesize, I suppose. So it has been suggested in the various reports on ash dieback that one of the potential benefits of dying ash trees will be a short-term increase in deadwood and in decay wound cavities, and therefore potentially a short-term increase in availability of roost spaces. And that may well be true, but in the medium to long term, those dead trees are going to fall. And from what I understand of the progress of ash dieback, it makes the timber pretty brittle, and so those trees are not going to stand for very long. So that's a small benefit. If again, we don't actually really know what proportion of our ash trees to expect to die. There are differing reports from different countries, and I mean, it could be 90%, it could be 20%. We won't know for a long time. If it's 90%, then a great many ash trees are the hedgerow trees that we now have. And in the past, there were many more hedgerow trees that were elms, and we see the regrowth that comes up and then dies off again when the bark beetle attacks it, when it's a few inches diameter. And ash is probably going to go the same sort of a way, and the big trees will become brittle and fall, and we will have ash thicket and ash regrowth in the hedges rather than trees. So that will radically change the structure of many hedgerows, because bats and other species very much benefit from hedgerows with trees as opposed to just hedgerows. It may also result in a change in mowing, trimming practices, because if you're a farmer and there's a whole bunch of ash trees down your hedgerow, maybe it's easier to leave it a bit big. But if there's no trees there, then maybe you're just going to be lazy and set the trimmer and do a short run. I don't know. Overall roost availability, yeah, if we lose 90%, that's surely got to have an impact in roost availability. And also foraging, because a lot of insects also generated with ash. But will those insects be equally generated by other species? Well, the biomass may well be, but it'll be different species. And I don't think we can really prejudge just quite what that change will have. The availability of cavities will definitely go down for a spell, because ash, as I've said, are quite good for producing cavities as a whole, and the cavities that they produce tend to be quite good quality in terms of being dry. So yeah, I think the quality of available cavities and overall will reduce in the quality and number. Sycamore I've mentioned quite a few times, and they do produce a lot of cavities, but most of them don't seem to be particularly appealing. And that's what behind my question of, has anyone found a maternity roost in a sycamore tree? I'm so far aware of 3 confirmed maternity groups using sycamore trees out of thousands of checks. And I need to look into this, dozens, or is it hundreds? Probably dozens of maternity group records. So it's not looking particularly positive in that sense.
Okay.
But we have a long way to go before we can understand it.
Okay, understood.
Thank you, Gavin.
Going to your following up the question of abundance of tree hollows, and looking back at your analysis of Green Lane wood, Gavin Hageman asked, do you think there was a particular abundance of tree hollows in that wood for some reason, or do you think your experience of finding so many successfully eventually is just what you would expect in other woods if they were so thoroughly investigated?
Good question. I think two things to say to that. One is that within Green Lane wood, the distribution of those features is very, well, let's call it patchy, lumpy. It's not a continuous availability, even availability throughout the woods. Different management practices, different growth histories, for whatever reason, have meant that in some areas, say the field maples, are absolutely full of these wounds that create nice, good, dry spires. And then you can walk 100 meters or 200 meters and find another patch of field maples where there's maybe 1 or 2 such features. And I don't understand how these features originate or why they should be so patchy in distribution. Equally, having had that experience at Green Lane, I've gone looking in other woods where there's field maple, and in some of those woods the field maples have almost no features at all, and in other woods again they locally have many. So it's patchy, that sort of a thing. The other answer is about the overall management of wood. So Green Lane wood's been there for quite a long time and relatively undermanaged, until the Wildlife Trust took it on when they got a grant from the Forestry Commission to manage the wood as recreation and nature reserve and to reinstate some traditional management. So about a third of the wood was turned into coppice, short rotation and long rotation. And those areas didn't get any real bat survey spent on before they started felling trees. It's a changing sphere that the level of attention given in the early 90s when they started taking that on by anyone, any landowner on the whole, to checking trees for bats was very scant. And it's very different now. But so a lot of trees were probably lost, but that wood nonetheless had been left for approximately 80 years with more or less no management. Many other woods get managed much more intensively. And if you are walking through a wood that's been managed for firewood, say, and it's been ash and sycamore, and it's let to grow to 30, 40 years, and then it's felled, maybe 50, 60, but it's thinned somewhere through that, they're all growing up fairly competitively and straight and fast. They don't form many cavities. So you can walk through some woods, you can walk through a wood that's largely sycamore and see, no cavities. And then the next wood, it's more uneven aged, it's had maybe more disturbed history, and it'll be full of cavities in the sycamore.
Okay. Following up again on the question of cavities and woodland management, Silphus Muldal raises the question of, would it be logical for conservationists to think of actively creating new roosting features in living trees?
Absolutely, yeah. So first, that's a great thing to do. The difficulty, if you like, it's a difficulty, is just that it's early days and we don't really know how to do that effectively, for sure. But that's no reason not to try, especially now that we're likely to be losing a lot of features to ash dieback. It's a perfect time to be trying this out and trying to increase the number of features that are forming. There are various projects out there starting and doing this. Some have been going a while. There's one pan-European one that's based in Sweden, but it's pan-European, where they've been using chainsaws to design and create holes. There's a few others. There's one as well that's being run by Jim Mulholland in the UK. PTES funded 5-year project, which is creating deliberate roost features in a variety of trees and then monitoring them. They have a bunch of these trail cameras like the one I used on that Union to try and monitor how well they're used. It's one of the difficulties we have with tree roosts. You'll have the same if you have buildings, you know that you can stand outside and watch, and if you're lucky you'll see the bats come and go and you might be able to do a count. But buildings are difficult because they can be porous and you might need 12 people around a building to count all the bats out. Trees have their own challenges. They may only build one exit. You might know where it is, but it's up in the canopy and it's behind leaves and it's dark and you're craning your neck, and you don't want to have to walk into that woods after a long drive every night and walk out in the dark. So there's developing projects all over the place about using cameras to monitor activity. The gold sort of standard is going to be having a long life battery camera that has a pre-trigger and can record what comes and goes, and you see actual full counts on over an extended period. And we're not a million miles away from that, but so Jim's project is one of those that's trying to push that frontier. Yeah, definitely creating new roost features is a great project.
So if I could find that myself, what about the question of bat boxes, as opposed, how useful do you think they actually are? Obviously, they're very useful in some ways as part of academic studies, but as a feature of the environment, do you think they compare usefully compared to the number of holes that are already in trees?
That's really hard to answer in a way, because we don't know what the full availability of tree holes is in any of the woods that have got bat boxes, in my experience. So it's hard to really know how they compare. They certainly have their uses. I think I'd be cautious about really trying to promote bat boxes as a great thing to do too much of, just because they have a cost, to be produced, to be manufactured, to be put in place, to be checked. If you're going to check them, you don't have to check them. That's certainly true. And to be maintained. And then, that's all something additional you have to do with the woodland. And there's actually quite a lot of pressure now on sourcing bat boxes. And this is before ash dieback. Certainly things like the Schwegler ones are really hard to get hold of now. There's not enough being built. And the more that we move ahead in development, the more demand there is for things like cement. So the prices will go up and the availability will probably go down. Wooden bat boxes, yes, you can make wooden bat boxes, and those can be useful. Again, they have more maintenance costs because they'll rot sooner, but you can certainly make them quicker. I think maybe the better option is if we can work out how to create effective new roosts directly in the trees, but as already said, we don't know how. I wouldn't want to put anyone off doing bat boxes, but I wouldn't say it's a panacea.
Okay.
Not very helpful answer, sorry.
No, well, it's an honest answer. Sort of following up on the whole question, though, of whether it's installing a bat box or whether it's creating a feature, or indeed whether it's considering the usefulness of features that are that you observe in the environment, natural holes, whatever. Does it matter to what extent does it matter to the bat which direction the hole is facing? Sally Gillard raised this.
Not as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
So there's not a question of being away from the prevailing wind or anything like that, out of the direct sun or in the direct sun?
I guess I don't really know enough suitable data to answer that sort of question. So a lot of the tree features that we have been studying are in woodland, so they're relatively shaded to start with. So we don't have maybe and then you would want to look at long-term occupancy data, which is the sort of thing that's actually quite hard to get, and why we really benefit when there are these sorts of cameras and monitoring stations that can give you long-term day after or night after day after day occupancy data, and ideally numbers as well of which species. That will put a great deal more power into any observations and analysis. But at the minute, you can imagine that maybe once a month I get to go around, used to get to go around the trees at Green Lane. I don't get there anything like that often now, but for a spell I used to get there once a month and go around. So that's like 12 days in 365 that I had data on occupancy and suitability. It's a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. In question of surveys, Paul Jeffrey asks, do you know if Harcourt Arboretum has been surveyed?
I do not know if Harcourt Arboretum has been surveyed at all. No.
Okay.
I don't know anything about that. I know that there has been some interest in and occasional surveys of some sort for bats there. I remember Danny doing some trapping yonks ago. Carl Lofthouse. But no, we don't know the details of what has and hasn't been done there. No, sorry.
Okay, and would we also ask, would you be interested in running a sort of practical workshop at some point for our members of the group?
Yes, that might be a while away, but yeah, can do that.
Okay, good. And finally,
it probably wouldn't be I'd be more likely to do a sort of a show and tell kind of a one, in a sense, rather than I'm going to train you to use an endoscope type of event.
Indeed. I mean, one way you can see, there's no, I mean, it's great to see pictures, photographs, but it's a different experience in the woods.
Completely. Yeah. I could do a tour of some examples.
Yes, that would be excellent.
Yeah.
I'm sure that would be well received, well popular. So finally, perhaps just before I pass us back to Alison Leaf, I see that she had actually presented a question in the chat, so I'll just ask that on her behalf. Are bats in tree roosts vulnerable to any particular predators, or are they relatively safe there?
I think that's another one that's going to be answered by these fancy cameras when we get them all on the go. Again, for the reason that we just aren't there often enough to know. Mm-hmm. If, say, a pine marten happened to go into a woodpecker hole that was full of Bechstein's bats, you can imagine it might kill a bunch of them and eat some and cache some maybe, and some will escape and never go there again. But how do we know?
Yeah,
we would have no idea.
Unless you happen to have a camera there at the right time to pick it up. Yeah.
One of the tree roosts that my Becksteins at, I think of them as my Becksteins, they're not mine. Down at Green Lane is a tree that needs a climber. So this summer, I had some friends come down and they went to climb the roost, to climb the tree. It's an ash tree, to look in the woodpecker hole to see if the bats were there, because they weren't using the bat boxes at all. It was too hot and dry in the boxes, so they simply weren't going in the boxes. And this comes back to what you were asking about boxes. And again, boxes are, unless you place them carefully, and even then, they're relatively lightweight structures. They're always going to be more prone to desiccation and heat, and bats don't like desiccation, so it's not the same as a hole in a tree, even if it's nicely built. But yeah, anyway, so the bats not being using the boxes, so they went to climb this tree, and they got to the foot of the tree, and they had to walk up the hill, so they stopped, put their packs down, and had a quick chat. And while they were chatting, a bat started suddenly pouring out of this hole in absolute panic. And a couple of minutes later, out came a squirrel.
Wow.
But was the squirrel attacking them? Or did the squirrel just happen to go in there because it was looking for somewhere to lie down? Or was the squirrel on the ground eating something, and as they walked up the hill towards the tree, the squirrel went, "Ooh, don't like this," ran up the tree and decided, well, I'll just pop in here for a minute while those people go by. We've no idea. There are films of noctules, I think it is, in a woodpecker hole that has been used for nesting by starlings. So you've got starling chicks and starlings coming and going, and noctules on the wall around. Wow. And I would have thought maybe starlings would attack her, but no. No, we don't know. Predation. Alison, sorry, can't answer you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Keith. That's been a wonderful talk, and thank you very much for your honest and thoughtful answers. But now I just want to hand over to Alison, if she can unmute herself and make some closing remarks.
Great. Well, yes, I'll just add to Bob's thanks to, thanks for a wonderful insight into a different way of looking at bats. And I think it almost makes me think a bit like diving. When you first go diving, you get a totally new view of the world. And I guess when you first put your endoscope into a tree hole and see a roost of bats, it's like a sort of light bulb moment, seeing different things. So thank you very much for sharing that. I particularly loved the thermal video of the Dormentons emerging from the tree. I mean, that was just art. It was just so beautiful. So yeah, thank you very much. It seems from the questions and answers as if there's more questions than there are answers. So there's lots to keep you going for another years and years of endoscope study. But yeah, that's been fantastic. So thank you, Keith, very much for a wonderful lecture and for answering so many questions. Round of applause.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Who's got their cameras on. So I'd just like to say a little bit about our next lectures. We've got the next lecture is 11th of January, and we've actually fairly recently secured our speaker, thanks to Bob. We're going to have a talk from Dr. Ian McGill, vet and former government scientist, I believe, who's going to talk to us a bit about the science behind badger culls. So I think that will be fascinating. We then go to Albania for another feline topic in February, when we're going to hear about lynx from Alex Tracci. And then finally, on March the 8th, we are having a talk from Sasha Hooker, who's professor at Scottish Oceans Institute in St Andrews, talking about marine mammal behaviour. So we're having a wide spectrum of flying mammals, swimming mammals, terrestrial mammals. And so hopefully you'll all join us for the 2021 talk. But final word, thank you very much, Keith, for a wonderful December lecture.